Tired of bloating, fatigue and sluggish digestion? Meet your gut's new best friend, NutriHealth 365's microbiome supplement. Restore balance, boost immunity, and feel amazing from the inside out. Smart delay release capsules, real results. Gut health just got personal.
We're going to take a look at the immediate fallout of the Manchester attack. We're going to talk about World War III, and we're going to talk about Ed Milliband. An interesting show coming up for you this morning on Trending. Right, good morning everybody. I hope you're well. So we're going to start with yesterday's events in Manchester. I recorded a quick reaction video to it a few minutes after it happened, just urging people to hold their counsel, which I think is always very, very important when it comes to events like this, because usually very quickly there is an official narrative, and quite often the official narrative is not actually really what's happened, certainly not the whole truth about what's happened. So we're going to look into the initial evidence or initial reports of what's come out, initial findings, initial conclusions that have been drawn, and see if there's any holes in them, because I think that's part of the job. So for me, when it comes to events like this, I always put them into three different categories. Now, I don't believe that every single time somebody goes on a rampage and does something abhorrent like this, it's necessarily the state, it's necessarily the cult, it's necessarily organised. There are lunatics out there. There are evil people out there that just want to hurt other people, just want to attack people who may have a different faith or a different ideology or a different sexual preference, whatever it may be to them. Those people exist. We all know they exist. We see them online. We've probably met them in person. So I'm not saying that every single time something like this happens that it's necessarily a conspiracy, it's necessarily organised, it's necessarily part of the agenda. I put them into three different categories. Ones that are just idiots, lunatics, deeply unpleasant people who have an issue with whatever the other person may be doing, or sometimes attacks like this can be completely random, and these are just evil and very unpleasant people that go out and harm innocent people for no reason. You have them. So that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the cult, anything to do with the state, anything to do with a false flag or anything like that. That's one category for these events. A second one is, as we know, things like this are listening to us 24/7, as are our televisions, I'm sure, as are so many other technological devices that people interact with daily. So therefore, conversations are being picked up. I have no doubt these are going into the security services and through GCHQ and things like that. So if people are openly talking about planning events like this, I would suggest there is advanced knowledge. There is advanced warnings in many cases if these are very organised. So another category is that you know something's going to happen and you just let it happen. You don't necessarily have to have any involvement yourself, but you just essentially, as we've spoken about with political assassinations, is you just remove the traditional level of security and checks and balances, and you essentially create the environment where something that is being planned is allowed to go ahead. You know, you could argue October 7th with that, with the lack of a response time and the standing down of troops on the border that day. And then the final option is a completely controlled cult operation. 9/11, I would suggest, would fall into that category, for example. Now, it's far too early and it's far too soon to know exactly which one of those three categories this particular event falls into. Now, when you say false flag, people get very offended because they assume you mean that didn't happen and therefore people didn't get hurt or lose their lives. That's not what a false flag is in any way, shape or form. A false flag is simply the official story you're being told about an event is not necessarily the truth. And I'm not saying this is one. It's far too early to draw those conclusions. And the point I am making, and the point I made yesterday, and I will reiterate now, is so much evidence is usually still to come out about events. Sometimes they are exactly as they appear. Sometimes they are open and shut, black and white, very simple. Most of the time they are far more complex than it's initially suggested they are. Charlie Kirk, perfect example. It was portrayed immediately that it was this lone gunman, Tyler Robinson, who had a trans partner and had been radicalised through this community. Yet you actually just pick away on the surface a tiny bit and you can see there is so many holes in that story, it's actually laughable. And I'm deeply, deeply disappointed and shocked by just how many people who claim they are awake and open-minded that have bought that official narrative, hook, line and sinker, without any further investigation. Including his wife, actually, which I find quite bizarre. But back to this particular story. So when I did the video yesterday, 4 people had been attacked and were injured. 2 of them have sadly lost their lives. Adrian Dolby and Melvin Kravitz, 53 and 66 respectively, have lost their lives as a result of this. For people around the world that haven't seen this story, yesterday morning a man drove into a crowd of people outside a synagogue in Heaton in Manchester and then got out the car and stabbed a number of people. I believe 3 additional people on top of the 2 that have lost their lives are also in hospital with serious injuries. The police shot the man they believe to be the attacker, 35-year-old Jihad al-Shami, a British citizen of Syrian descent. Apparently he came to the UK in 2006 with his father, who was a doctor, and he was raised and was given British citizenship about 10 years later, I believe. So there's a lot to unpack here for a number of reasons. So it's very clear that there is a civil war brewing in this country. It's very clear that you have the Muslim faith, the Islam faith, against the rest. That's kind of the civil war that is being sold, essentially. We're being told that everyone that comes across the channel in small boats, everyone that is in these hotels, and everyone that is up to no good around these hotels are all fundamental Islamists. We're being told, obviously, today that this man that's committed this act in Manchester was one as well. So then you have what they would call the indigenous population, or the rest of the population, if you like, which would include the Jewish faith as well, that are on the other side opposing this takeover. And it's seen as very black and white. And I'm not a person who is sitting here disagreeing with large factions of that. I believe that the towns and cities, certainly the cities and growingly the towns now as well, have been dramatically transformed in the last decade in this country, and not for the better. I don't think many things, to be fair, have been transformed for the better over here or in many parts of the world, but certainly when it comes to the multiculturalism, it doesn't work, and it hasn't worked in its current format. And it's because it lacks a very simple principle, which is a principle of respect, a mutual respect for each other's beliefs and ability to live their lives how they want to live. I've said this many a time. I'm not sitting here as a British patriot saying this. I'm sitting here as a human being who has some respect saying this. If I went into any other country, anywhere in the world, I would expect to be expected to embrace the culture, learn the language, and go and live in that country based on the culture of it. Otherwise, why don't I stay where I was? That's the principle. If you're going to live in another nation, in theory, you're going there because you like the culture, you like the people, you like the food, you like the weather, you like the countryside, all those different aspects that make you want to stay somewhere. So why then would you go there and try and change it? I don't understand that. And that's not me sitting here as a British man saying this. That's me saying that. I'd be saying the same as an observer in countries like Spain, when lots of Brits go over there and make it into Blackpool with a bit of sunshine. You know, people that go into America and do the same thing, people that go into Australia and do the same thing. For me, this is about basic respect. Every country has its own borders, every country has its own culture, has its own history, has its own way of living life. And for me, if you are going to be an immigrant to any country, anywhere in the world, you should embrace that culture and try and integrate within it. That's the way multiculturalism can work. It can work if that is the case. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And many will argue, and I don't necessarily disagree, that there is lots of cultures in the world that don't want to integrate, that don't want to assimilate into the culture they are going into. They want to take over and turn it into the one that they have left. Why have you left that one then? That's a very simple question. If the country that you are leaving has everything nailed down, the way they live, the way the country is governed, the lifestyle, the culture, all of those things, if they're great, why are you leaving? Why are you trying to go to a country that is completely different? Really simple. If seeing women walking around without their heads covered offends you, why are you coming to a country where you know that's not the case? If seeing, people drinking alcohol, people eating certain foods, for example, offends you, why are you going to a country where you know that is going to be the case? It's really, really simple. It would be the same principle of me moving to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, for example, and then complaining I can't have a bacon sandwich. Well, I knew that before I went there. So why would I then try and change that? And I'd like to put out on record that if I did do that in Riyadh, then I don't think I would be given a hotel and spending money. I think I'd be dealt with in a very different way. But anyway, so the official story is that this was a Islamic extremist, not known to the police, not on any prior investigations, grew up in the city of Manchester, just a few minutes away from where this synagogue is, and for no one knows, one day decided to go and carry out this. Now, I have a few questions. The fact that the guy is called Jihad, for me, immediately is making my conspiracy tinfoil hat attitude go, well, that's very, very convenient, isn't it? Because jihadist extremists is literally the terminology used to describe these people, and this guy's called Jihad. To me, that feels... I don't know. I saw a radio host, Richie Allen, tweet about that, saying, you know, that there's literally trolling. And it feels a little bit like that. It feels a little bit like that, I will say, sorry. But like I say, at this point, all that we know is 2 people have lost their lives and 3 people are seriously injured in hospital. There is no reason, there is no justification, there is no scenario where that is okay. That is ultimately should be the focus of people's minds, is that those people that are in hospital make a full recovery, and supporting the families of those 2 people who have lost their lives. You know, 53 and 66, you're going to assume they have adult children, they maybe have grandchildren, they will have wives, and they will be obviously in a state of absolute shock, disbelief and mourning today. And I think it's very important that the community around Manchester and the Jewish community there help rally round and support those families. I think when events like this happen, emotions are obviously very, very high. And when you're even suggesting that potentially the official story may be open to a few questions, you're labelled as disgraceful, disgusting, lacking empathy, when, for me, if you're going to investigate something where somebody has lost their life, don't you want the investigation to conclude the truth? Don't you want the right person behind bars? Don't you want the right outcome that gives nothing's going to bring those people back, but gives them some form of justice? So, for example, to take a large case where a lot of people have had a go at over the years, 9/11, where people are still talking about it, so people are still investigating it, people are still questioning it because there's so much to question. You're labelled as lacking empathy. You're labelled a disgrace. You're labelled inhumane. What if the families of those people that lost their lives knew that the people behind 9/11 are still in positions of power, still in positions of influence, and still walking the streets today, while the people who were chucked under the bus and accused had nothing to do with it? We were talking yesterday, and we were recording a show about political assassinations, and we were talking about the Bobby Kennedy assassination and the fact Sirhan is still in jail, despite the fact he clearly didn't kill Bobby Kennedy, and the Kennedy family actually don't even believe that as well. Same with Martin Luther King's family, that don't believe James Earl Ray killed him. So they never had true justice because they know the people that actually killed their loved ones are still at large. That's why, for me, when events happen, it's important to ask those questions. It's not diminishing the emotional response these people are having of losing loved ones. Absolutely not. It's not stamping on their graves. It's not in any way disrespecting the fact that people have lost their lives. In my opinion, it's actually respecting it more. It's respecting them more because you want true justice. You don't want a patsy being thrown to the wolves while the true perpetrators continue to walk at large. Exactly the same scenario you can apply to Charlie Kirk. The person who shot Charlie Kirk is still walking the streets. The guy in jail absolutely did not shoot him. No chance whatsoever. I would categorically say that now on record. Yet the people that have just accepted it and gone on with their lives and, pray for Charlie, and all of those people that then gone on this media tour talking about the dangers of X, Y, and Z, you're not actually doing him any justice. You're not doing him any respect because you've accepted a narrative which is clearly full of BS. If you truly cared, you'd go at it more and more, you'd pick the holes, and you'd try and find out what was really going on. Anyway, back to Manchester. The point is, it's obviously very early days, so it's very difficult to conclude too much because it's only just happened. And it's very difficult to pick apart too much of the official story because there hasn't really been one released yet, apart from a few timelines of the man driving into the crowd, trying to enter the synagogue, stabbing a few people on the street, and then being apprehended and shot by police 7 minutes after they were alerted to the fact that this man was committing this attack. So, as with many cases, the perpetrator, the suspect, is now dead, so he can't speak. He can't put any side of the story or any explanation for his actions on record. So it's all going to be people essentially conjecturing. There's no defense. Not that I'm saying there is a defense. If this official story is true that this guy did this for, off his own back, then there is no defense. But you're never going to know that because this man is not breathing anymore. So therefore, he's not going to be able to speak for himself. I understand that the police have raided his home, obviously, in Manchester. What comes out of that, there's no real information coming out yet, but whether they'll come out and say he had links to terrorist groups in the Middle East, Hamas, for example, quite probable, quite possible. But the reason I think this has happened, and this is I think the most important aspect of this, is everything is seen as black and white. And as I've said many times, you don't necessarily have to actually do something. You just create an environment where it's going to happen on its own. Now, so many people for years were blind to the way Israel was attacking the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. They're not blind anymore. Since October the 8th, 2023, the mass killing, an indiscriminate killing. They can claim all they want. They're using targeted precision weapons and they're only targeting terrorists. They can claim that all they want. But that's not true. And you can see that very clearly with footage and videos coming out of Gaza. And also the fact they're not allowing foreign journalists to go in. So people are not blind to this anymore. And understandably, that's created outrage among people. And that outrage has been directed, if this is the case, in the wrong direction. Because the Israeli government is a regime. The Jewish people is a faith. It's completely different. Obviously, there'll be Jews that will absolutely support what Israel are doing, and there's large numbers of them that rabidly oppose what they're doing. Absolutely cannot stand what they are doing and say it's not in their name. There's been young Jews in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv ripping up their conscription cards to join the IDF. There's been, I've been at protests over the years, and there's been lots of Orthodox Jews there standing shoulder to shoulder with people supporting the Palestinians. And they get attacked and they get dealt with in Israel very strongly by the security services because the last thing they want is what's perceived as their own people turning against them. So I see this as a very similar principle to people looking at every Muslim and thinking they are a terrorist when they're not. There is a fundamental core of dangerous people within every demographic and every faith, I would suggest. Is there some terrorists that are going to be Muslims? Yeah. Is every single one a terrorist? Absolutely not. Is there going to be some Jewish people who will fundamentally support what's happening in Gaza? Yes. Is it all of them? Absolutely not. So the indiscriminate attacking of any civilian, whatever your faith, for me is absolutely unacceptable and is absolutely part of the problem in many ways, because you're killing innocent people, but it's part of the problem that we have had, the human disease of divide and rule. We have been allowed to be divided based on faith, based on culture, based on ideology politically, based on gender, based on sexual preference, based on skin colour, all of those things. More so now than ever before. You'd think in a society that is supposedly evolving, people would be getting closer to each other, but in fact, for me, they're getting further apart. And that's for a number of different reasons, all of which, in my opinion, are orchestrated, but we're falling for it time and time again. If this man, it comes out, this man has links to Hamas, or they tell us that he does, or he has links to pro-Palestinian groups, for example, which again, I'd say is possible and probable. don't then flip this round and look and go, okay, in that case, I was opposed to what Israel are doing, but now I'm really happy. Go and do it, because look what they did. The Palestinian innocent population in Gaza, the vast majority of which are innocent people, half of which are children under the age of 15, they didn't do this. They didn't do this. Just like the 2 Jewish guys that have been killed, they didn't drop bombs in Gaza. Do you get the point? The anger is being aimed in the wrong direction. And as a result, on every side, innocent people will die. Innocent people will lose their lives. And to me, that is unacceptable. And there'll be people on all sides of this watching this saying, you're being too soft, you're falling for the propaganda. I'm not falling for any propaganda. I'm sitting here going, 2 people have lost their lives. And I don't think that's acceptable. I don't think that falling for one side doing something and calling it out and the other side doing the same thing and accepting it, I don't believe that's okay. I also think that in the last few years there has been a real change. It's the final point I'll make on this. Before, I remember 2014 when Israel went into Gaza and you couldn't say a word. You basically couldn't say a word. You got censored, you got abused, you got called anti-Semitic. We had events in 2018, 2019. David got banned from Australia in 2019 for supposed anti-Semitism. We had events in London that we had to find new venues for at the last minute, and lots of different parts of the country actually, and Europe. You couldn't say a word, and all of a sudden, post October 7th, you could. And a lot of people have said some very, very extreme things, and in my opinion, gone way too far. But it's been allowed. You know, those posts are still on X. Those things are still on YouTube. Those things are still on Instagram, Facebook, all of those things. And it felt like this kind of thing was going to happen. You know, Gareth spoke about false flag season a few weeks ago, spoke about it again yesterday morning on his trending episode. And it definitely feels like we are there. You know, we spoke about that a few weeks ago before the Charlie Kirk assassination. Now we've got this. There's been other events across the world as well, like the shooting at the church in America on Sunday, and it feels like we are moving towards something. We are moving towards something, but the fact that this criticism of Israel has all of a sudden been allowed, for me, is not an accident. It's not because they've thought, okay, fair enough, you know, we went a bit too far in our censorship. It's being done for a reason. So I think we're going to see a new law, I would expect, in this country to do with anti-Semitism. That would not shock me whatsoever. We've already seen it in America. Charlie Kirk said before he died that it's easier to criticise the American government in America than it is to criticise the Israeli one. I think we're potentially going to see something similar over here in the wake of these attacks. And also, this also ties in my opinion, to digital ID. Because digital ID will enable the system to far greater track and control people, their movements, their conversations, their behaviours, their friendships. And again, you might laugh and say that sounds extreme, but it won't, will it? It's not. It's not the sales pitch they're going to give you. Of course it's not. But it's certainly an outcome. And by creating more civil unrest, by creating more problems on the streets, by it all being seen as jihadist immigrants and Muslims, it's very, very easy to see how you can get support for something that people would not normally support. No one would have supported a lockdown, but they terrified people to believe they were going to die if there wasn't one. So as a result, lots of people accepted it. It's a very similar principle. You create an outcome where people are less likely to resist something that they would normally have resisted. And I think that's quite possible in the follow-up to this. But like I say, I'm not concluding too much. All I know is that some people have lost their lives, and our thoughts and condolences go out to them and their family, and those 3 people in hospital. Hopefully they make a very quick recovery, and this is not life-changing for them, and no one else has to lose their lives. But as I said yesterday, the principle still applies. Hold your counsel, look at who benefits, look at who had something to gain, look at what the official story is, ask the obvious questions, and see if it stands up to scrutiny. And quite often it doesn't, sometimes it does. But it's very important to always have an open mind, I believe, with events like this. Well, with anything. Hence why our mantra here at Iconic is question everything. It's very, very important. Question everything, including everything we're saying. We're not going to get everything right every single time, but we'll be very quick to acknowledge when we get it wrong, which unfortunately not many are. Well, if you're with us on YouTube or other forms of social media, thank you for tuning in with us this week. If you want to watch the rest of the episode, click the link below.